with England, the folk, now believe me, I took a whole quarter course at UT in medieval England. And there's a whole lot more that can be said about it. But I'm just going to skip over the main themes. Starting with William the Conqueror. King William, he was the Duke of Normandy. And don't ask me how he got to be Duke, because he was an illegitimate son. Actually got to be Duke because his father had no legitimate children. So his father's name was Robert the Devil, by the way. And Robert the Devil decided to make up for his sins by going on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and he died on his way to the Holy Land. So that way, Duke William, as a boy, inherited his father's throne, and he was fearful of his life. Everybody wanted his crown, so some of his friends hid him away from one castle to another. Oftentimes he was hidden away in basements to keep him alive. But he grew up, got a powerful following. He was playmates with the King of England, who promised that, the king at this time was a boy, who promised that I'll give you the throne. Or the King of England said, I'll give you the throne when I die. Well, the King of England died, and William saw he did not get the throne, so he decided to take it. So William went in with a bunch of men that he collected, a bunch of Frenchmen and men from Belgium, and what is today Belgium, and took England, conquered England, and governed England for, well, every king and queen of England from his day till now has been descended from William. So he was that important. We're called William the Conqueror. He went from being William the Bastard to William the Conqueror. He was originally, he was illegitimate. Anyway, now, I could go into a lot more detail about the Battle of Hastings where he defeated King Harold, but I won't. But there is something here that I always throw in. Don't write this down, folk, again, but I like to talk about some of this stuff because I've run into it in my research. A man was following William whose name was Warnibald. Warnibald was from the land of Flanders. We call it Belgium today, but it was from the land of Flanders. And when William won, Warnibald was given some land far to the north of England. Actually, he was given some land in what is today Scotland. Warnibald then took this land, and he married a girl and took her surname. The woman he married was named Cunningham. Now maybe you see why I said the story. So he, Warnibald, took the surname of Cunningham, and his descendants became the Earls of the Cunningham County for the next 600 or so years. The line became dormant when the last male heir died in 1802. But they were the Earls of Glencairn, and one of them actually got as high as Chancellorship of Scotland. But they were a noble family that were given the title as a result of following William the Conqueror. And William rewarded the persons who had followed him, including Warnibald. All right, yeah, his name was Warnibald. Don't write this down. I mean, this is just something I throw in. Am I descended from Warnibald, who lived in the 1100s? Most likely I am, because, I mean, come on. Well, we have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1,024, 200, 2,056, on up and on. Until by the time you get 30 generations back, you have more than 1 million ancestors. I am probably descended from every Scotsman who has descendants who lived in the year 1000, including the kings and the nobles and the commoners and the peasants. All right, let me ask you, some of you might know this. If someone were to offer you $1 million outright, or a penny today, and double that penny every day for just 30 days, 2 cents, 4 cents, 8 cents, 16 cents, which would you take? The penny doubling or the $1 million outright?
The penny double.
Some of you know the answer. You take the penny doubling if you're smart. It doesn't seem like a penny doubling would add up to $2 million at the end of 30 days, but it really does. And that same thing applies to genealogy. Of course, eventually your lines come together. In 30 days, that's up to $2 million. Get on your computer and do the math. I've done it. You starve for 10 days. At the end of day 10, you get $10, then 20, 40, 80, 100, 160. Then at the end of day 30, you have $1 billion, but you already have $1 million before then. That makes $2 million. Okay. All right, so much for William. Henry II. Now, he was the one who we've already talked about, married Eleanor of Aquitaine. Now, here's something he did that really applies. how could he increase his power? Because the power of the king seems so limited. And folk, a lot of people believe that this is one of the things that made Europe great. Europeans, for many generations, limited the power of their kings and would not allow them to rule as absolute despots. So Henry thought, well, I know what I can do. I'll build up the courts. So Henry appointed judges and gave them the power to make law. But the nobility objected and said, no, you're giving too much power to your judges. So then after that, Henry had to acquiesce and say, okay, from now on, a law can only be made if the nobles agree to it. Now, what's this apply today? Because we have given our judges so much power that they're out of control.
Oh, yes, they do now.
Yeah, basically, our judges are unaccountable and they can make any decision they want to. And I want to give you an example. Can they overturn the Constitution? Yes, they did. The 15th Amendment gave blacks the right to vote. In the 1870s, the Supreme Court said, well, the southern states can put literacy tests or charge poll tax or other means to keep the black people from voting. This is in the records, folk. They actually overturned the Constitution. Yes, so they don't have to abide by the Constitution. The Constitution means what they says it means, no matter what it actually says on paper. And so far, nobody's found a good way. I had a pupil one time, and he was surprised because I thought he was liberal. He said, one of these days, it's going to take a president to stand up to the judges and say, enough, I'm not going to obey your decision. If he does today, he might be impeached, but it's something that our presidents have been afraid to do. I mean, Roosevelt thought of it. Roosevelt was about to pack the Supreme Court, but add 9 more judges to make, well, actually, some will make 16 judges. Then Congress would say that again.
When you say judges, you mean the Supreme
you're mumbling. I can't understand all that.
I'm sorry.
No, I never connected it.
When you say judges, do you mean the Supreme Court?
The judges, our judges in this country, make all of our moral decisions for us. It's not our elected officials. They make our moral decisions for us. They are the ones who decide. Basically, they're deciding what the law is and what it isn't. Every law that is passed, this was not even true myself, every law that is passed has to go through what's called judicial review. If the judges agree to it, it goes. If the judges don't agree to it, it's not law. And you never can predict what they're going to do. And, well, some years ago, Congress passed a tax law, a luxury tax. Every item that they called luxury would have a 10% church surtax. Within a year or two, this surtax was done away with because it was bad law. Because Congress can overturn their laws. The Supreme Court almost never overturns its own bad decisions. Almost never. Now, there have been a few exceptions. All right, but anyway, Henry II appointed judges. Now, one of the most famous fights Henry got into was an unfortunate incident. Thomas Becket. Thomas Becket had been a member of the church, but basically he was a worldly man and not so much a church man. And one day Henry appointed him Archbishop of Canterbury, which was the highest position a churchman could hold in England. In other words, in those days there were no cardinals, so the title of Archbishop meant that he was one step down from the Pope. And all of a sudden, now see folks, it was like, all right, this has happened in recent American history many a time. You appoint a judge Supreme Court, and once seen, you don't know what he's going to become. Well, Henry thought, I'll get control of the church. This is my man here. He'll do what I want him to. And all of a sudden, when Henry appointed Thomas Becket became a churchman. I mean, it wasn't just he put on church clothes. Worse than that, he even thought like a churchman. He took the church's side on every issue. And even the Pope wrote him a letter, please, Mr. Becket, kind of cool things now. We don't need the controversial stuff. He insisted that the church courts try every case involving a churchman. And sometimes a churchman would do things that should be tried in secular courts. But he said, no, the church should try its own cases. He also insisted that, and now here, this is a problem that Europe had to deal with. A lot of persons, to earn their salvation, as they were dying, they'd will lands the church. Well, what happened? The church got more and more and more lands down to until after a while the church owned acres upon acres and square miles of land it did not need. Folk, I may not have a lot to leave them, but I've been asked, leave something for us in your will. No, when I die, it all goes to my children, my family. And if I've raised my children right, the church will still get its share from the children. These charitable organizations will still get a share. I mean, I contribute to churches and charitable organizations, but I don't leave it in my inheritance. Because here's what they did. These people were leaving the church, and Henry decided, I've got to get some of this land back. The kings of France, the king of Poland, the king of, Germany, the kings of Germany had to deal with the same thing. The church has all this land that you don't need, and every once in a while the church would try to get it back, and the church would say the king who does this is going straight to hell. So this was what put the kings in terror. Charles Martel took land from the church, and he was condemned to hell forever for it. This was their theology, folk. But anyway, Thomas Becket insisted, no, the church is going to keep its lands. Well, finally, Henry was sitting around the table with a bunch of knights, and then some page boy brought him a letter from Thomas Becket, where Thomas Becket refused to do what the king ordered. Henry, in a fit of rage, these kings could throw fits of rage. Henry said, "Oh, you dogs who sit around my table, can't any of you take care of this upstart priest for me?" 4 knights got up from the table, went to pay a visit to Thomas Becket. And if you read a detailed account of it, it sounds like Thomas Becket kind of provoked them. But nevertheless, these knights, one of them chopped Thomas Becket, knocked his brains out, basically. To make a long story short.
Yes.
At this point, Henry had lost his fight with the church. Thomas Becket was made a martyr and a saint. His statue still stands in Westminster Abbey. I've been there and I've seen it. But he became a martyr for his cause. Henry had to do penance for the rash deed. He was justifiably blamed for the killing of Thomas Becket. Basically, Henry lost his fight with the church, as so many kings during this time did. As recently as the 1800s, the Emperor of Germany, and even Bismarck engaged in a fight with the church. Bismarck was the German prime minister, and he lost. Sometimes it's difficult to take on an institution like the church and win. Henry found it out the hard way. Anyway, I remember Henry strengthened the power of the courts. Henry also married Eleanor of Aquitaine, and she bore him 4 sons, and one of the reasons her first husband got rid of her was she wouldn't bear him any sons. But she bore him 4 sons. 2 of them became kings, King Richard and King John. When Henry died, the throne went to his son Richard, the Lion-Hearted, who went on several crusades, but we're going to skip him and go directly to John, because he turns out important. John has been called the worst king England had. Now you notice, I don't put a number behind John's name. Now, if there's ever another king named John, they'll call him John II, and this will be called John I, but the royal family has not named its children, its sons, John. There was one exception. There was John of Gaunt, but he never became king. He was a younger son. But anyway, King John was a heavy drinker. He actually had all the vices of people of his day, someone said, without their redeeming virtues. He actually, though, was a pretty good administrator, but he was capable of throwing temper tantrums and fits and rolling on the floor and just screaming and hollering out of control, somewhat like his father Henry had done, except John was worse. One day, John went to France, where he had a bunch of holdings that he inherited from his mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Went to France, and while there, he heard a rumor about a charter. Came back, and he found out that all the nobility approached him at a place called Runnymede, and they made him sign the Magna Carta. John saw that the nobility was against him to a man, every one of them. Now, what they did, they didn't depose him. They didn't rise up and try to kill him. Assassinations were rare during the Middle Ages. There were a few, but generally people did not assassinate their leaders, whether it be a duke or a king, but they simply said, "Your Majesty, you're still going to be king, but here are some things that you cannot do." And they listed about 16 things that he was not allowed to do. Basically said that your power is limited. John signed. Yes?
Is this the king that dealt with the Scots, like Robert the Bruce and William Wallace?
No, Robert the Bruce, that's Scotland. That's...
Is he the English?
No, you're close, you're close. The one who opposed Robert Bruce was Edward. All right, John had a son named Henry, but about 100 years, they were 100 years apart. And then Henry had a son named, let's see, John, and then Henry had a son named Edward I. Then Edward II, after Edward I, he was the one who opposed Robert Bruce and lost. So you're about, because Henry the third, it was Henry III, lasted so long, about 50 years. He was one of these kings, and by the time he died, of course, well, when you have a king or queen, it lasts a long time. By the time they die, all their brothers and sisters are gone, and all the other members, and a whole new generation is taken over. That was the case of Henry III. Another thing John did that the royal family was like, John carried his royal treasury with him everywhere he went. And one day he was crossing the Thames River, and the boat that all the treasure was on capsized, and has not been found to this day. The royal family has said if it's ever found, it belongs to us. But all these gold and silver coins and trophies and whatever else, it was all gone. And some people believe that that's what hastened John's death. He died shortly after that. Anyway, but to remember him as being the one who signed the Magna Carta, Winston Churchill was to later say that England owed more to the vices of John than it owed to all the good statesmen who had ever lived. Perhaps so. But this was the beginning of, all right, one history book I have at the house, still yet, put it this way. John's descendants, pathetic though they may be, still sit on a throne. They still occupy a palace. Queen Elizabeth II herself is descended from John, has no power. In fact, one time Queen Elizabeth II expressed an opinion, and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher rebuked her sharply. You're not allowed to do that. Even a private citizen can do that, but the Queen is not even allowed to express an opinion. This actually happened, and Margaret Thatcher scolded her sharply. Margaret Thatcher was a prime minister whose job was to scold the Queen if she got out of line. Yes, oh yes. But anyway, today's kings and queens don't have any. What's that?
Didn't everyone hate Margaret Thatcher?
She was the longest. No, they became that way. But she lasted 11 years. No other prime minister in this century has lasted that long. None. So there was a movie made about her. It's called Iron Lady, which I happened to see. And in her old age, she lost her mind, like so many of us do when we get older. But the people did finally turn against her. Yes. All right, I'll tell you what she would do. The prime minister and some high up officials would present her a paper and say, "This is what my," and she'd go through and look and correct the grammar. "Oh, you're mad." I mean, they said, "Listen, well, that's not come say right now. We're just getting this in an outline form." No, we need to correct this grammar right now. Typical, an old lady who's starting to lose it all. And they finally had a rebellion of the party and ousted her, and her mind got worse and worse as time went on. I mean, maybe she couldn't help it, but. This happened. All right, now Edward I, I want you to remember him. This will be the last one from England. He is remembered. All right, the power of the kings was limited. Now, Edward was actually a grandson of John. Besides, there had been a king who lasted some 50 years. Anyway, in the case of Edward, he needed money. And he asked himself, how can I get the money that I need? And he thought, I know what I'll do. I'll call all the nobility to London, get them under one roof and stand in front of them and say, here's what I need. So he called all of them to his palace. I guess he might have wined and dined them, even though I don't know that for sure. But then he laid down to them, folk, here's what I need. I need this money for this. I need this for this. And here's how you'll benefit. If I can get this project done, we all will benefit for it. And he got the money he needed. This was the beginning of Parliament. Eventually, Parliament. All right, the Parliament at first only included the nobility. But eventually they invited the commoners in to make it better, especially since the nobility didn't pay taxes anyway. Folk, this was true in Europe until Queen Elizabeth II. For many years, Queen Elizabeth II refused to pay taxes. They finally told her, Your Majesty, you have to. Everybody else is. And she finally started paying taxes. When Spiro Agnew had to resign the vice presidency, he was Richard Nixon's vice president. When Spiro had to resign over tax evasion, this was in 1973. As recent as 1973, the high-ups in Europe were still exempt from paying taxes. Today, of course, The nobility pays taxes also, along with everybody else. But anyway, Edward convened Parliament, and eventually Parliament took over, and Parliament became the governing body of England. Again, the word Parliament is a French word which means to speak, because these kings of England had a lot of territory in France, and most of them knew both English and French, and would spend a lot of time in France.